I know it's only been one game for South Carolina guard MiLaysia Fulwiley, but is there a chance that she could wind up becoming the greatest basketball player in South Carolina's women's basketball program history?
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I am your host, Andrew Line, and I am also a staff writer for Gamecocks Digest over on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more right now as new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, I know that Dawn Staley and South Carolina's women's basketball team, they just got their season underway this past Monday afternoon against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And that game was also the debut of highly anticipated true freshman guard MiLaysia Fulwiley. A lot of Gamecock fans I know were very excited to see what the South Carolina native could do on the hardwood. And I know that it is very early on in her career. So some people are going to roll their eyes when I say this. But when you compare her debut and her numbers to two of the best players that ever wore the garnet and black for South Carolina's women's basketball program, MiLaysia Fulwiley could end up being the best player the program has ever had. Now, the two players that I am referring to here are, of course, Aliyah Boston and A'ja Wilson. Those two players have been a big reason why South Carolina's women's basketball program is now a national powerhouse, as they have helped South Carolina win 2 national championships in the last 6-7 years or so. MiLaysia Fulwiley could very well be the next one, but let's compare their debuts from a numbers standpoint. MiLaysia Fulwiley, when she played against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish on Monday afternoon, this was her final stat line. 17 points scored on 57.1% shooting, 6 assists, 6 steals, and 1 turnover in 25 minutes of play. Now, let's compare this to Aliyah Boston and A'ja Wilson's debut stat lines, and then we'll actually do an individual comparison with both those players. Aliyah Boston's debut stat line came back in 2019 against Alabama State. She scored 12 points on 37.5% shooting, recorded 12 rebounds, 10 blocks, and 3 steals in 21 minutes of play. A'ja Wilson, she recorded 4 points on 28.6% shooting, just 5 rebounds, and 3 turnovers in 16 minutes of play against the Southern Cal Trojans all the way back in 2014. Seems like forever ago when A'ja Wilson was just getting her Gamecock career underway. So let's first of all compare MiLaysia Fulwiley's debut to A'ja Wilson's debut. From a numbers perspective, the debuts are not even close. Fulwiley, yes, she played a whole 9 minutes more than A'ja Wilson did when she got her career start here at South Carolina. But Fulwiley, she just did a lot more from a numbers standpoint. She scored 13 more points on a much better shooting percentage, by the way. She had 6 assists and steals. And despite having the ball as much as she did in her 25 minutes of play, she only had 1 turnover. A'ja Wilson, not even playing guard when she was here at South Carolina, she had 3 turnovers in 9 less minutes compared to MiLaysia Fulwiley's debut. Now, the only defense for A'ja Wilson, when you compare both of these players' debuts, is the fact that A'ja was clearly playing on a team that at that time, while still pretty good, was not as talented and deep as it is now with the team that has MiLaysia Fulwiley. But Fulwiley was also playing against a much tougher opponent in her debut in the number 10 ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Asia Wilson, on the other hand, was playing against a Southern Cal Trojan squad that at the end of that 2014 through 15 season finished with a 500 record of 15-15. So I think when you compare both of those debuts, I would think it's absolutely fair to say Fulwiley's debut definitely is better than Asia Wilson's. Now, the interesting part of this conversation comes with the other comparison. MiLaysia Fulwiley's debut versus Aliyah Boston's debut. Now, again, numbers-wise, this one, it's actually a little bit closer than the other comparison. And really and truthfully, it depends on how you value them compared to or relative to the competition that both of these players face. So, again, I talked about MiLaysia Fulwiley's stat line already and mentioned that she played a top 10 team in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. By the way, on a neutral floor, not even stateside. Aliyah Boston, on the other hand, she did have, again, a really good debut for South Carolina. She recorded a triple-double, which just does not happen very often for any true freshman heading into the college ranks. She had 12 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 blocks. The only thing about that game that gets a bit devalued or devalues that performance for Boston is she was playing against an Alabama State squad in the Colonial Life Arena, and that Alabama State team went 9-21 in that 2019 through 2020 season. So while it is fair to say that Aliyah Boston's triple-double is still quite impressive when you look back at it, the quality of competition, I do believe, has to weigh in heavily when you talk about that game. And therefore, you have to have the same kind of conversation when you discuss MiLaysia Fulwiley's debut for South Carolina. So my overall point with the opening of today's show is I know it's only one game. And I know some people probably already in the comment section on YouTube and saying, Andrew, you're making way too much out of this first game. She's still got to play another 30-plus games just for a freshman year. There's still plenty of time for us to see whether or not she could be the best. But I'm telling you right now, just purely based on her debut, relative to the competition she played, and then comparing that to the two players who are right now perceived to be the greatest players this program has ever had, there's a good chance MiLaysia Fulwiley, she's already on track to become the best player South Carolina's women's basketball team has ever seen take the floor. Of course, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 4 years. And as I've already mentioned, we better enjoy it while we can, because just objectively speaking, she's going to be one of the most exciting players that this sport has seen in quite a while. And she's definitely a part of this new generation of player that just makes highlight reel plays every single game. So nonetheless, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see how MiLaysia Fulwiley's career at South Carolina unfolds. Now, of course, we got plenty of time remaining in South Carolina's 2023 football season. And with that means there's going to be more press conferences from Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer has generated a lot of conversation lately about his delivery of his post-game pressers, what all he says at his post-game pressers. It's brought about a bit of a debate amongst some fans regarding what all he says or maybe he doesn't say. And a couple of former Gamecock players decided to weigh in a few days ago indirectly when it comes to this debate. I'm going to touch on what those former players said and what they were referring to in terms of the head ball coach when he was here at South Carolina in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is really simple to play because I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app out there. Now, the Carolina Panthers are taking on the Chicago Bears on Thursday Night Football just a little over 24 hours from now. And Bryce Young's projected stat line for that game is 223.5 passing yards. Now, I think that Bryce Young's going to throw for less than that total because The Carolina Panthers, they don't have a very good, really anything on offense to speak of outside of Bryce Young when he has the chance to throw the football, but their run game is atrocious, and the Chicago Bears possess a top 5 rush defense, so they're going to put him behind the sticks very often, and I think it's just going to be tough for Bryce Young on a short week on the road to put up a decent performance against this Bears defense. If you agree with me, or maybe you want to go check out some of the other athletes and their stat lines on Prize Picks, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. Okay, let's have a part 2 of the discussion regarding Shane Beamer and what all's been going on with his press conferences lately. Now, I'm not going to dive into the whole, one side versus the other in terms of the fans, maybe how you might feel about it. But today, I want to go over some interesting responses from some former players of South Carolina. But the thing is, those players were not directly responding to what Shane Beamer did in his presser. Instead, they responded to what a fan brought up regarding the head ball coach, Steve Spurrier, and a press conference moment that he had after a sloppy win against the Vanderbilt Commodores back in 2014, where South Carolina, quite frankly, escaped with the win, and the head ball coach was not happy. So what I'm going to do real quickly is I'm going to play a soundbite, 2-minute soundbite of Steve Spurrier giving that opening statement for that press conference. Then I'm going to show y'all the players' reactions to that on Twitter, and then we're going to discuss this all together afterwards. So take a listen to what Steve Spurrier had to say after the Vanderbilt game in 2014.
That was a game I didn't like a bit, although I'm proud of the offensive kids for scoring a bunch of points here and there. And Bryson Williams picked one off, got a defensive score. We sort of thought we might could get one. But the way we play is embarrassing. I told you guys, it's embarrassing the way we play. And I'm the head coach of this embarrassing group of guys. Allow 2 kickoff returns. Defensive backs won't turn around and look for the ball when they lob it down the field. In 3 deep, and they throw it off the 2-yard line. Our kid lets a guy run right by him. It's embarrassing, but we are who we are. We're not a very good team, but we're 3-1 somehow, and we got all the voters fooled thinking we're pretty good, I guess because we beat Georgia. But anyway, I don't know exactly what all can help this team. I really don't. We thought we coached our butts off all week, and we could look like a decent team. And, of course, they run the opening kickoff back. So I'm taking over kickoff coverage. I told Coach Joe Robb, I'm not going to watch him anymore. I'm going to take it. If we have to pooch it on the ground, which was pretty good for us. That grounder was pretty good. But maybe we found something Landon can do better than anybody in the country, that grounder, because it took a funny hop every time. It was sad. We just kept running right by the kickoff return guy, and he just split us just about every time, I guess. But anyway, it was discouraging, but it is what it is. We have to almost score a touchdown every time, or we're going to get our butts beat somehow or another, it seems like. And fortunately, we were able to score a bunch. Guys hit some passes. Dylan had a few good ones here and there, missed it. When Dylan snuck it in, I said, that was a mistake. We should have taken about 3 downs to try to sneak that thing in. There was 4 minutes left, and we only had a 14-point lead. So I was nervous, but fortunately they didn't recover the kick. Or they would have scored, like they did in 30, 45 seconds, wherever it was, and they'd been onside kicking to go tie the game. So that was a mistake on my part, letting him score with 4 minutes left in the game. So I'll try to get smarter in the future, and hopefully we can get better. But it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing the way we played. All right, he quit.
All right, so again, that was what Steve Spurrier had to say after a really, really sloppy performance against the Vanderbilt Commodores, which was still a win back in 2014. And this goes back to the whole debate surrounding what Shane Beamer did this past Saturday. Talk about how the Gamecocks are going to celebrate the heck out of a 10-point win over Jacksonville State, with, again, some fans saying that, that they totally understood it, that, the players hadn't won a game in over a month. They deserve to celebrate. And then other people sitting there saying, you should never celebrate the fact that you barely almost escaped defeating Jacksonville State. And with that particular press conference, that is Steve Spurrier's press conference they had in 2014. This was posted on Twitter by somebody who got a clip of that, and that's where I got the soundbite from. But a couple more players decided to share their thoughts on that particular press conference. And here's a photo of sort of those tweet interactions. And for those of you listening on an audio podcast app, I'm going to read this off for you real quick. So Mike Davis was the first player that I've seen that responded to that specific press conference, Steve Spurriers. And what he said was, quote, I see a lot of folks praising this video, but he definitely lost respect for a lot of players. And the team meeting was even worse. And the funny thing is, a national college football writer, Brad Crawford for 24/7 Sports, who I believe probably has some sort of affiliation with South Carolina because of how much he tweets about them and all that on his Twitter account, he replied to Mike Davis asking for telling the truth, ? And then to that specific tweet, Damiere Byrd, a former speedster wide receiver for South Carolina, who was a part of some of those great teams they had in the glory years of the Steve Spurrier era here at South Carolina, he responded to that tweet saying, quote, this is the kind of post-game interview that'll get folks ready to play for you. So this is very, very intriguing, to say the least, because we now have former Gamecock football players that have sort of weighed in with this debate. And what this seems to confirm is that, look, you might not like how Shane Beamer goes about his press conferences, but if you're going to have a coach that does it one way where he maybe rips the team apart for playing very sloppy in a win, or the other way where the coach acknowledges and says, hey, we did not play our best game today, and we certainly got to be better, but we still won the football game, and we're going to celebrate as such. Based on what just Mike Davis and Damiere Byrd said, it appears that you would much rather have the latter delivery if you're a head football coach of a major college football program versus the former. You've also got to keep in mind that, it's different generations of players that Steve Spurrier sort of grew up in and, coached at the beginning of his career versus what Shane Beamer is coaching now. And that's not to say that, one generation was harder than the other and the other one was soft. That's not to say that, okay? But the point is that, players these days, they don't have much patience to deal with a football coach that's just going to scream, holler, and yell at them and basically make them feel like that they are, just the worst thing on the planet at times. That works for some players, but it doesn't work for others. And in today's day and age, it kind of seems like that, for the most part, if you have that kind of approach, unless you've got a certain kind of player in your program that you've recruited and brought in, that's going to backfire on you more often than not. So, again, that's not to say that, Shane Beamer's delivery and his type of philosophy when it comes to celebrating wins is the only way to go about it. It's not to say that. But Shane Beamer, I will say this. He also made a very intriguing comment at his Tuesday press conference that I didn't have time to include that in there because that would have been a whole extra 5 minutes, and that would have just wasted y'all's time. But there was one part that I did want to share with y'all. He said in yesterday's press conference that he was once a part of a team where a coach lambasted the team's performance in the locker room after they had won a football game. And then he said verbatim that they turned around and did not win another game the rest of the season. And that he pretty much made a promise to himself from that day forward that if he ever became a head football coach, that he was never going to have that kind of approach after a quote-unquote ugly win for his football team. So it's pretty clear and evident based on what the players had to say, Mike Davis and Damiere Byrd, two former Gamecocks, about Steve Spurrier's approach, and what Shane Beamer admitted on Tuesday, that Shane Beamer, he's got a certain reason behind why he operates the way he does. Again, it's not just because, he's just happy-go-lucky all the time. No, it's because he really values having his players' backs and being able to build up a certain trust level with those players to where, hey, when you're out of line or you're not performing up to your best of your abilities, I'm going to call you out on it. But at the same time, I'm going to love on you just as much. That seems to be the kind of approach that Shane Beamer has where, again, publicly, I'm not going to call you out, but that doesn't mean that, there's no sense of accountability. And hearing him explain it more on Tuesday, I now have a much better understanding myself of why Shane Beamer goes about his post-game pressers the way he does, including, pressers after ugly wins, whether it was against maybe Vanderbilt back in 2022 or against Jacksonville State this past weekend. So really, really interesting to see former players weighing in, and who knows, if it ends up happening again this weekend, maybe we'll see even more former players jump in and give their opinions on it. Would definitely like to see some of that, because I think it's good to bring some clarity when you have former guys that were in that locker room that can really, provide some context to those kind of situations. Now, in terms of talking football, I've been talking a lot about 2024 recruiting prospects recently, but specifically guys that we know, at least as of right now, are going to be in Columbia for the 2024 season. But there's one guy out there that at one point he looked like a Gamecock lean, and then he didn't. And now it looks like maybe South Carolina could still be in the mix for this guy. I'm going to talk about this prospect and what exactly he said the other day in an interview in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Now, there's a really good game taking place on Sunday in the NFL world between the San Francisco 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars, two of the best teams in the NFL right now. The Jaguars are 3-point underdogs despite being at home. And the money line for both these teams is set at -164 for the 49ers and +138 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So again, you want to place that $5 money line bet and win, you can get $150 in bonus bets. That's why right now is the best time to join FanDuel. Plus, the app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day. And as always, I really appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in to today's show. If you're interested in more content from the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, be sure to subscribe and click the bell on YouTube, or give us a follow wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. And because this is a recruiting segment, I want to let y'all know that this recruiting segment is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, let's talk about four-star running back Daniel Hill. Now, at one point back in the summertime, this kid looked like a Gamecock lock, to put it bluntly. He had taken countless visits from this past winter, say around January or February or so, all the way throughout July, heading into August. He always felt comfortable at South Carolina, gave a ton of great quotes about the program, and also at a couple of points, he named South Carolina his leader in his recruitment. And then I really don't know how else to put this except for family business got involved. And what I mean by that is his dad has stated multiple times publicly that he wants to see his son go to Alabama. I'm not going to dive any further into that. You can have your opinion on that as much as you want. I'm not going to say anything on it. But Daniel Hill, he was supposed to commit back in early August. At that point, South Carolina felt very comfortable about where they were in terms of their positioning, and he decided to postpone it. He pushed it back. And then now he's taken a few straight visits to Alabama. South Carolina hasn't seen him come onto campus since this past summer. But I continue to say, or I think I have said before, and I will reiterate it here on today's show, if Daniel Hill was an Alabama lock, he probably would have already committed to him. But guess what? We're now sitting right here on November the 8th, and he hasn't done so yet. But we do now know when he will announce his final decision, and that will be on January 6th at the All-American Bowl. He'll be committing during that football game as well as playing in it at the same time. And he talked recently with 24/7 Sports Director of Recruiting Steve Wiltfong about his recruitment. And when Wiltfong asked him about, what he's looking for in the school that he eventually commits to, this is what Daniel Hill had to say in response. Quote, "I want to go to a place that feels like home, where I feel I can not only reach my full potential athletically and academically, but as a person." This is the part that I want y'all to really listen to. "I want to help change a program and be a key factor in a major turnaround and trajectory of a school." Let me just throw out this question real quick. Does that sound like he's talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide? No, it doesn't. Because besides, I guess, maybe only winning one national title in the last 5-6 years, there's nothing to change about the trajectory of Alabama's football program. Alabama is one of the best programs in the entire country. Okay. But South Carolina, on the other hand, they are trying to change their trajectory. And the past couple of years, it was skyrocketing upward. This year, it's kind of stalled out. And now it's kind of flatlined. And you hope now that South Carolina does not follow that up with a second straight, disappointing season in terms of their win-loss record. And then you start to see that trajectory go downward. Daniel Hill would be a big-time get for this football program. I've discussed this before as well regarding his skill set. This is an all-around running back. He has got size. He can run over people, but he also can catch the football and run routes. He plays linebacker, running back, wide receiver. He's even played some quarterback for his Meridian High School football team in Mississippi this fall. This kid is a great athlete. He also, I believe, he runs hurdles in track and field. This is the kind of running back that South Carolina has probably been looking for several cycles now. And I know it hasn't always been great, the recruiting at that position, but they are really starting to turn things around there. They got Dontavius Braswell this past recruiting cycle. They got Mario Anderson Jr. out of the portal this past offseason, which, as it turns out, was probably one of the best gets for them in the offseason. They've got Matthew Fuller in the fold right now for the 2024 class. Matthew Fuller, in my opinion, is a younger version of Mario Anderson Jr., who's already built like he's been in a college program for a couple of years. And then you have Daniel Hill. You land a guy like Daniel Hill, you have got maybe your most complete back that you have had in your football program probably since Mike Davis, dare I say. Now, that's not to say South Carolina has not had any good running backs since Mike Davis was here back in 2012, through 2014. They've had some guys come through here like Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle, if it weren't for injuries, who knows the kind of career he could have had here at South Carolina. Marshawn Lloyd, maybe he actually would claim the title as being the most complete back South Carolina's had in recent years. But again, I understand fans don't want to talk about him as much. That's fine. Mario Anderson Jr. turns out, hey, he's not just a one-cut north-south running back. He can do a bevy of different things. He can help in pass protection. He also catches the ball quite well. He can make some guys miss after the catch or after contact as well. But South Carolina, they haven't had necessarily, how do I put this? They haven't had that game-changing back. And really, besides Marshawn Lloyd, since Mike Davis, they haven't really had a guy that could change an entire football game because of the way he played alone. Daniel Hill, in my opinion, can be that kind of guy. And when you hear him give a quote like that, where he specifically talks about wanting to change the trajectory of a football program, that just sounds like he is just screaming to the mountaintops, South Carolina. It does. Now, I will also admit this. I know that when it comes to the 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, sometimes we do have to take these quotes with a grain of salt. This also could be his way of saying, listen, I have not forgotten about South Carolina. South Carolina is still in the mix here, but might not be him exactly saying that, South Carolina's in the lead. We can't try to read too deeply into this, but I cannot help but feel like with giving that kind of statement to a guy that has as many connections and has so much notoriety as Steve Wiltfong in terms of the high school football recruiting space, that is him saying that, South Carolina, you are still here, okay? You are still in this race. And again, if his dad had his way, by this point, he would have already committed to Alabama. He probably would have already, acknowledged his dad's wishes and fulfilled them, and he would be with the Crimson Tide already. But he hasn't done that yet, which tells me that Daniel Hill, he's not backing down completely. And again, I'm not going to get into that anymore. Probably even shouldn't have said all of that. But point is, do not give up on the Daniel Hill recruitment, okay? I know that some Gamecock fans, you already feel like there's no hope. A parent wants him to go somewhere else. Usually never ends well for the school the kid likes. We just need to move on. I'm telling you, don't move on yet. I will not promise you that Daniel Hill will end up a Gamecock in the end of the day. But it is clear, based on at least this quote, in my opinion, that they're still on his mind. Very much so. So, January 6th, mark it down. All-American Bowl. Multiple Gamecock commits as of right now are going to be playing in that game. But also, Daniel Hill, who knows? It could end up being a great day for South Carolina if their commits perform really well on the football field, and also if they can land this 4-star out of the state of Mississippi. But with all that being said, that does it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank y'all so much for tuning in once again. What are y'all's thoughts on MiLaysia Fulwiley's debut and how it compares to other Gamecock greats? Do you think that that means she could become the greatest women's basketball player in South Carolina program history? What are your thoughts on Mike Davis and Damiere Byrd sort of speaking out their opinions regarding press conferences and what works for the team and what doesn't work for the team? And lastly, what are your thoughts on Daniel Hill's quote that he gave to Steve Wiltfong? Do you think South Carolina still has a legitimate shot to land the Mississippi native? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on audio podcast app. But once again, thank y'all so much for tuning in. As always, have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show right here on the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.